You're listening to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. Here's your hosts, Jeremy and Pat.
Hello and welcome to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. This is episode 385 of the podcast. My name is Jeremy Deemer and I'll be your host. I'm joined as always by my co-host. He's my cousin and he comes to us high atop Wrigleyville tonight. How's it going, Pat?
It's going well, Jeremy. Thank you.
It's been a week. We'll quickly mention at the top here about Ryne Sandberg's passing. We talked about it last week that it felt like it was imminent. It was really sad news this week. The Cubs had a lot of good tributes. We heard from a lot of former players. If you've heard the Sean Dunston interview and clip, that was just heart-wrenching. And we will dedicate the entire back half of this podcast to talking about Ryne Sandberg. We have Ryne Sandberg stories, tributes from Bruce Miles, who was the beat writer for the Daily Herald. We've got author Randy Richardson sharing some of his thoughts, as well as Andy Dolan from Pointless Exercise also sharing his thoughts. And then we usually close the show with a Cubs player profile every week, and we're actually going to replay the Ryne Sandberg player profile we did earlier in this season. So we'll close the show with the player profile of Ryne Sandberg. So the entire back half of this show will be dedicated to the memory of and remembering all things Ryne Sandberg. And to help us talk about all things Cubs this week, and the man who selected Ryne Sandberg as his player of choice for that player profile, longtime friend of the show. You know him from his work at Cubs Insider. Evan Altman, thanks for taking time out to talk Cubs with us tonight.
Hey, I'm happy to be here. Dialing in from a 1970s vintage-inspired residence inn in Eden Prairie, Minnesota. This is I'm just looking around at my surroundings and just it's quite an interesting setup here. So apologies in advance if the odd smells come through on the video, but we'll see. But I do. I'm not going to steal you guys' thunder by any stretch, but I did want to throw in there. I as someone, and there's a lot of Rynes that are out there, right, over the last 40 years or so, as those of us who grew up watching him named our kids after him or whatever. And it was, I thought that was interesting. He did that one time. He was at Cubs convention. He said, how many people out there are named Ryne? And you saw all these, you saw all these hands shoot up. And I'm like, I only knew of one, right? And he himself was named after Ryan Duran, right? The Yankees reliever, which I always thought was funny. But when the news broke, I couldn't say anything, so I pulled up I think it was Marquee or the Cubs tweet or something, and I just kind of showed my son the phone and my wife, and again my son, he's 16, 17, almost 17, and he was as broken up about it as I was, and I just thought that was the most interesting thing when you talk about the legacy and the impact that someone has, that someone who never ever got a chance to see him play, right? Sandberg was done, years, a decade before my son was even born. But for him to have understood the gravity of this player, more than a player, it was just who he was as an individual. For that to come across and for that impact to be felt by a different generation, I thought that was really powerful and super cool. And it sucks. And I'm going to shut up now so I don't get super bummerish. But I just, to me, that was, I think, a huge measure of the impact that he had on the Cubs, and then, again, multiple generations of baseball fans for what he did.
I also couldn't help but think when I first heard the news, even though we knew it was coming, it was very reminiscent to when Walter Payton passed in terms of the impact it had on the community and the city. And when you would listen to the radio or you'd go on Twitter or even television, story after story after story of people who are like, yeah, I was celebrating my birthday at such and such a restaurant, and we saw Ryne Sandberg, and he came over and took pictures with us. And it's like the Walter Payton fix my flat tire, pulled over the side of the road and fix my flat tire stories. It's like the guy was everywhere, and he was always a gentleman and always great with his time, giving his time to people. And that says a lot about somebody, especially somebody who probably sometimes just wanted to have dinner, and relax. But he always put in that effort. He understood the value of it. And I think he was as much a professional, as much a stand-up guy off the field as he was on the field when it came to stuff like that. Like, he took his being a former baseball player seriously, and felt a certain obligation to carry that forth in his entire life.
Yeah, definitely a huge loss for anyone who was near the Cubs and had the privilege of meeting him or just watching him play. Just a huge impact on so many people, and we will dive deeper into that impact later on in the back half of this show. For now, we're going to start with the other news of the week. The trade deadline happened. It happened to us. We watched with I'd say a disappointment would be a way to try to express how we felt, as I think the fan base had starting pitcher as number one need for this team. And either the front office didn't feel the same way, or the front office only wanted a starting pitcher if they were going to have additional control and were uninterested in a rental, as they were unable to do anything in the starting pitching side. They did add to the bullpen. They added to the bullpen in a way that was not as impressive as the Phillies, Padres, and Mets all added to their bullpen. And then the Cubs, I think the universal okay, that's a good trade was Castro being added from the Twins as part of the Twins fire sale of the century here, giving away Twins. This was a great pickup for the Cubs, a much needed utility man, bench bat, as we were also pining for. Evan,
before you opine, Evan, I just want to say, just to put everything in context so we can all remember where we were a week ago.
Just a week ago.
At 12:40 p.m. on last Saturday, so 8 days ago, Michael Cerami posted on Twitter, and I think this captures the consensus of the Cubs zeitgeist at the time. My final guess for the deadline, he says, Cubs get Eugenio Suarez. Cubs get one playoff caliber starter, Cabrera, Lugo, etc. Cubs get a second starting pitcher that is big upside but isn't right now, like Bieber, Alcantara, Gallen. Cubs get two relievers, both good but not like the Class A types. I feel like that's what people wanted. They wanted two starters, one playoff caliber, one kind of back end. A lot of, the Suarez was on everybody's minds, and then, a couple bullpen guys. I think of all that, they probably accomplished maybe the last, but I just want to throw that out there, just to as the primer for the conversation in terms of how I think a lot of people feel now in retrospect.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I think, this is as much as Jed Hoyer has done a great job when it comes to finding value. And there have been, we can look at Matt Boyd. We could look at Shota Imanaga, guys like that who were kind of surprises that we never really saw coming, that the Cubs paid far, far less for than the value they've received. We saw again in this trade deadline another scenario in which Hoyer has his spreadsheet that shows what the value is for everything, and it's an accountancy issue. It's what it feels like. Now, again, and this is based on sources that we've had that had mentioned that any of the controllable pitchers that would have been out there. So we could look at Joe Ryan, we could talk Mackenzie Gore, we could talk even Mitch Keller, that the price was Owen Casey, Matt Shaw, Cade Horton. Like those three, or at least two of those three plus in any of those deals. So it's understandable that they didn't, like that would have been, I think, an abjectly stupid deal to have gotten, at best, they're breaking even. And more than likely, when you're talking about as well as Cade Horton has pitched, you're talking about potentially only breaking even on the starting pitching front in the rotation, and then perhaps, again, cutting off your nose to spite your face. And I think the issue there is, we knew from the beginning of the season, like the moment Justin Steele went down, it was quite obvious that the Cubs were going to need to add a starting pitcher. And then, Jamison Tyone goes down. They've got other struggles. They're having to continue using Colin Ray. To me, though, that's the indictment, right? And they got away with it on Sunday. But the fact that they're still using Colin Ray in the starting rotation after a trade deadline in which we knew they had to add starting pitching. Now we're going to see Michael Soroka on Monday. But like even that is a guy where you're going like, hey, he's going to have to outperform his numbers and get back to his peripherals. He's always been better as a reliever.
Keep that area under 5. I think he's like 4.97 right now. So
yeah, and it's one of those where, but that is such a Jed pickup because all of his peripheral numbers say he should be much, much better. His expected ERA is much lower. It's like a 3.3 or something like that. Does he get better playing on a team that's not hot trash, that has better defense behind him? Who knows? But this very much feels as though, again, it's like going somebody who doesn't know any better. You get some country bumpkin showing up to, insert your favorite steakhouse in Chicago here, and they want to get a Wagyu ribeye, and then they look at the price and they're like, oh, and then they end up going to Applebee's instead. You know what I mean? Like that. And that's where it feels like, Jed, you knew you were going to have to overpay, even for like the mid-tier guys.
Yep.
And this is something that we have seen from him time and time again, where outside of really like Kyle Tucker, that trade is the very clear exception to the rule of we have established a value here and we are not willing to extend not even a penny beyond what that valuation is. And that's what it looked like in a market where we saw, you mentioned Shane Bieber, he went to the Blue Jays for one of their top pitching prospects, which I'm not equating him exactly to Jackson Wiggins of the Cubs, but very similar, right? To where, and this is a guy who's been out with TJ, who hasn't even started beyond AA in his rehab yet. So
he may not pitch in the postseason at all.
He might not at all. And that's the problem is that, okay, Cubs, you already have a bunch of number 2, 3, 4 starters. You don't need to add more number 4 starters, but that's what they did. They added depth. They don't need depth. They're fine there. And I understand the frustration. At the same time, I do understand the idea that would they have even been able to get the value that they needed? And I think it would have been more on the back end of the bullpen. And it just looks like by the time they realized that that's all that was left, then there wasn't anything left there either. So it's definitely frustrating, although I understand some of why it got frustrating, if that makes sense.
You mentioned the Tucker trade being out of character, and my cynical mind tells me, well, that's the Jed keeping his job trade. And now he gets an extension, and maybe that he's less inclined to go above and beyond the spreadsheet now that he's got his extension ahead of the deadline.
It was a curious time to extend your, I guess, team president, whatever his job is, 4 consecutive years now without a playoff appearance, a good chance of making the playoffs this year, but yet not having done so and not having really proven that that you've built a team that can be competitive in the playoffs. It did seem a little premature to extend it before the trade deadline, but I guess that was obviously a decision the team made. Makes you think the team is happy with how he's performed, which is concerning in some ways. Because ultimately performance is what you do on what the results are, right? It's not about how nice you are or what some of your nice finds are, because for every nice find there have also been a lot of missteps too, and a lot of lack of player development and a lot of other things that have come in that the inability to develop a pitcher between, say, Justin Steele, who was drafted in like 2012, and Cade Horton, who was drafted in 2022, that kind of thing. It's problematic. And I think, overall, when we grade, I'd be curious to see what your grades are for the trade deadline this year, just, all things considered.
Yeah. I mean, I can't, I think it'll be interesting, right, to see, like, does Soroka perform more toward his peripherals or more toward what we've seen? Does Andrew Kittredge, again, benefit from, because the Orioles have been obviously very bad as well, kind of unexpectedly so. Does that improve, right? Do we see Taylor Rogers step it up? Like, we could grade it really poorly now and then come back in a couple of months and be like, wow, actually, Jed did really well. I think on the surface, though, it's hard to give him anything better than a C. But one of the things that I find interesting, we talk about the extension, we talk about Hoyer and how he got the role in the first place, which was largely because Theo Epstein stepped aside a year early, let Jed make some of those difficult decisions from a personnel perspective.
Like cutting Kyle Schwarber.
Right, which was
decision number one.
Wonderful way to start. But, when that was all happening, right, like Theo was he was the guy out there, the three true outcome. Like, he's going to take big swings. He's trying to get these big money guys. And Jed was sort of the voice of reason that whole time. Now, and I'm maybe oversimplifying, but it always felt like Hoyer's job was to kind of rein Theo in a little bit, to temper some of those bigger aspirations that he might have, and to let them kind of balance off of each other a little bit. Whereas now you've got a guy in Carter Hawkins serving as that second in command to Jed, and they're both kind of for lack of a better term, like the milquetoast, again, the spreadsheet analytics guys who are not straying from that. They're the contact hitters. They're the Luis Ariz, right? Like, both of them. There is no Pete Alonso in there. There is no Eugenio Suarez where you're trying for that big swing, and if you strike out, oh well, it happens. It just feels like these are contact hitters who are going to dink and dunk little singles here and there, and that's about all you're going to get out of it unless you get lucky. And that's what I don't like about this, is you get the extension from Hoyer, but who's there in his ear kind of spurring him to be more aggressive, to find those. It feels like this is a group that is looking to, again, spend as little as possible, find some guys with some upside that can be brought out of, and as much respect as I have for their pitching development, and Tyler Zombro in particular, I know they brought him in from Tread Athletics. I love the things that he's done, but it does feel as though they would prefer to kind of rehab, or to not from an injury perspective even, but just to find little tweaks in performance from undervalued players, rather than overspending for guys who we know have a much, much higher top end capability. And unless they find somebody else to work with Jed in there and to be more aggressive from a front office perspective, I just think this is the same thing that we're going to see over and over again.
Yeah, I think disappointing that we didn't see the starting pitcher. I think it's important to look at how the Cubs are in a race for their own division. They currently are trailing the Milwaukee Brewers by 2 games as of the time of this recording, and the Brewers have the best record in all of baseball. And at the trade deadline, they went and added some bullpen help. They got Shelby Miller from Arizona. They added a catcher and some depth in the outfield.
They also added Brandon Woodruff, who's the equivalent of adding like an all-star level pitcher, just a couple weeks ago.
And then calling up Andrew Vaughn, who has come up and had a heck of a time so far. So, you really you're you're chasing a team. You're now in the wild card. You're leading the wild card race here that also has the Mets and Padres in it, which it's not going to be easy for the Cubs here. When the division, you had a chance to hopefully pull away, but after this trade deadline and the way that the team has been playing coming into it, we saw the Cubs play at Milwaukee. They lose 2 of 3 in Milwaukee. They salvaged the last game, but the first 2 games were, quite the ass kicking. And it was it was something that maybe I was, maybe these results here in Milwaukee may light a fire under the front office. They may be the thing that gets them to be more aggressive going into the trade deadline. But no, they did what they did. Evan, is it enough? Do the Cubs, as their current makeup is today, is it enough to win the division? Is it enough to just make the playoffs and maybe get out of the first round?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's still enough to win the division. I mean, we've said it for a while, and they haven't slowed down yet. But Milwaukee's winning at a pace. When you rip off 10 in a row and whatever 13 out of 14 at one point or something like that. And there's a point at which you look at the Cubs and they were 14-10 in July, something like that, right? Which is not great, but it's not terrible by any stretch. It's just Milwaukee was so much better. So at some point, I think you see water finding its level. My issue, and we go back to what they didn't do at the trade deadline, is that do you see, is it Imanaga, Boyd, and Horton right now would be your 1, 2, 3. Do you feel comfortable with that as your playoff rotation? And I know recency bias, we've seen good outings the last 2 from Boyd and Imanaga, but their previous 2 for each of them were giant clunkers against teams that aren't necessarily great, right? And that's and by that I mean actually bad, because we're talking about the Royals and the White Sox that tune them up. Horton's still a rookie. The thing that continues to concern me a great deal about Cade Horton is that high whiff rate, high chase rate, pretty low strikeout rate. It's one thing if you can't punch guys out, if you cannot finish hitters. We're talking about postseason baseball. We're talking about the potential of having a matchup with the Phillies or the Mets or the Padres, someone along those lines who have tons of veteran hitters who can all pick apart young guys. And again, a couple of lefties in there. I know they're very different. That's the part that worries me. And that's the thing. And the Cubs have pointed this. Craig Counsell has said it. Jed Hoyer has said it. Numerous reports of it. It's not about winning the division. It's about being able to win in the postseason. And I just don't feel like they have done what they need. Great. Jameson Taillon could come back. And Javier Assad. Okay, cool. Neither of those provides me with any sense of confidence when you're talking about pitching in the postseason. And that's where I feel like they just didn't do enough, because that's when we talk about the games, and granted, right, they played 3 close games against a team that basically traded away a third of its major league roster at the deadline in Baltimore, and still only managed to score 1 run, 3 runs, and then 5 runs, the last 2 of which came on a Justin Turner walk-off home run of all people, right? But the offense did nothing against the Baltimore team that has one of the worst ERAs in baseball. That's where I'm very concerned. You're talking, look at the pitchers Baltimore rolled out there. Who are they going to face in the playoffs? So, division, not a problem, or at least making that wild card. But my concern is very much what happens when you match the Cubs' top 3 against any other team's top 3 from a rotation standpoint, and then saying, can the offense get enough runs together to get over? And I don't have any confidence in that right now.
Or God forbid they have to face a lefty.
Yeah. Nor should you feel confident. I mean, I think, and that gets back to the trade deadline. If I had to grade the Cubs in this deadline, I would give them a D. as in dog. And that is because I look at trade deadlines not just within the context of what you did in the days leading up to the trade deadline, but I look at it as part of the season-long continuum. And Evans, to your point, we'll see what happens with the guys that they did acquire. But I look at the trade deadline as part of this, from October 2nd, whenever the Cubs were eliminated from the playoffs last year, 2024, until whenever they either win the World Series or are eliminated this year. That's like this circle, and along the line there are decisions that are made, who to re-sign, who to keep, who to acquire in the offseason, what free agents to pick up, what trades to make. The trade deadline is just one piece of that. And I think this year the Kyle Tucker move, as you said, Jeremy, was the we're going all in move, right? You're getting 1 year of Kyle Tucker, you're giving up Isaac Paredes, but also more importantly Cam Smith and whatever 7 years of control he has over him. And when the Cubs made that move, we were very excited because we thought, oh, finally the Cubs are making a play for the postseason. And the next move they made struck us as a little bit odd. They traded Cody Bellinger not to shore up the bullpen, not to get another starting pitcher, not to do anything other than as a pure salary dump, right? Cubs still paid some of his money, but they got the Yankees to pay the rest of it. And we said, okay, well, they've saved some money. Now let's see who they go out and get, because we knew they needed another starter even before the season started. We wanted some more depth. We certainly knew the bullpen could use help. There was talk the Cubs would try to get Bregman to play third base, the free agent who went to Boston from Houston. They didn't get him, and they went in the regular season with a payroll lower than the payroll they had in 2024, which is a curious thing to do in an all-in season, isn't it? And we were told. I feel like when I say this, it's almost like people don't believe me, but it's true, right?
I remember this.
The beauty of the Cubs going in with less payroll, was that they're going to have payroll flexibility at the trade deadline.
At the deadline,
this is talent, right? That was the deal. Because there are two ways you can get talent at the trade deadline. You can either give up prospects to get players, or you can take a player who's earning a lot more money than their performance would dictate. Even though their performance may still have value, the salary is just disproportionately high to the performance you're getting. So we had this extra money that we could spend to go out and get a guy from a team that's out of it, either a guy with an expiring contract or 1 year left who's making $18 million but playing like a player at $7 million or whatever the case might be, right? And we knew going into the season that the bench was razor thin when it came to talent, right? We did not have a lot of expectations for the Cubs bench. We knew that the bullpen was pretty nondescript. There weren't a whole lot of players in that bullpen who you're like, oh yeah, we rely on that guy, right? It was mostly guys who most people probably had to look up to find out, oh, he's been in the league for 6 years. I didn't realize he was 34. I've never heard of him, right? That kind of thing. And we knew that they could use a fifth starter, another starter, wherever it was in the rotation. In fact, in the offseason, let's go back even a step further. In the offseason, as soon as the season ended, what did everybody say? Just like this Michael Cerami tweet about the All-Star or at the trade deadline, the Cubs need to get a higher end pitcher for the rotation, right? They ended up getting Matt Boyd, who turns out to be so far, spectacular. But, I think, some of that's kind of luck, no offense. I don't even think Jed Hoyer thought he was going to pitch this well when they acquired him. And a lot of things have broken right. The catchers have been great. PCA is spectacular. But I think we knew that there were weaknesses on the team going into the season. The justification for not fixing them before the season, which, by the way, would have helped quite a bit. We probably could be 4 games better than we are now or more with just some minor tweaks. But we said, no. Trade deadline, baby. That's when we're going to do it. That's when we're going to use this extra financial flexibility. And guess what? We're battling teams like the Milwaukee Brewers who get extra draft picks, who get more money for international free agents, because the small market teams are given these benefits exactly because they don't have the money to spend on players and free agents. The Cubs do. This is the resource. This is what we have. That's why we and the Phillies and the Mets and the Dodgers and the Yankees, this is how we win. This is how we compete, by having the financial muscle and flexibility to make moves. When the Cubs didn't do that, they didn't want to give up prospects for players, or the price was higher than they wanted. and they didn't want to try to be creative and take on extra money, apparently, which they could have done. So if that's their point, then why not? I mean, hell, they could have gone around and traded Kyle Tucker at the trade deadline and say a Suzuki and maybe gotten, if it's really building up a farm system you want to do. But at some point, like, you wonder, like, time's ticking. Like, this is an old team. These are not half this, 2/3 of this team are in their 30s, right? And are going from 31 to 32. Like, every year, the Suzukis and the Haps and everybody get older and older, right? Swansons and Tucker's. You got Tucker for 2 more months, and he's probably gone. At some point, when is now, right?
That the team that was being creative was the Brewers saying, I don't want to give up some of our great prospects. So they took on Jordan Montgomery's money to get Shelby Miller. Like, they were the ones doing those deals, which is exactly something that the Cubs should have been doing. I love that point. They
could have been doing.
Could have been doing it. Absolutely. You can take on money, and you can take on bad contracts, and you can be creative in a way to reduce the impact of some of those prospects as well. Absolutely.
And as Evan noted, we're going to find out real quick about this Mike Soroka guy. He pitches twice this week, right? I mean, this is a team that's been hobbling along with 3.5 starters all season, if you count Colin Ray as half a starter, throwing out a bullpen game one of every 5 days. There's a reason why the Brewers caught us. It's because we throw out a bullpen game for the last, 30 days, 40 days. We've been throwing out a bullpen game every 5th day. That's why. And that's not sustainable. And I don't know if they did enough during this trade deadline to change it. Soroka's the only thing. Like, that's, if he is not that guy, then they did not fix that problem, and they probably don't deserve to win the division at that rate. And when they acquired him, what was the first thing that everybody said when they acquired him? Well, he's going to pitch out of the bullpen. He'll be like a longer inning guy out of the bullpen. No, he's a starter. He's our 5th starter. So it's like, okay, fine. Let's see how it goes. Because, you got less than 2 months left in the season. So it's a problem we have to fix. And then if we can get past that, then the real question becomes, like as Evan said, like, well, do we have enough to compete for the playoffs and be serious contenders and go far? And I worry about the pitching in that regard. Hell, I don't, when you talk about what's the rotation going to be with Boyd and Imanaga and Horton, I would say there's about a 30% chance that all 3 of those guys are healthy and pitching when the playoffs start. Like, Kyle Horton's already probably maxed out his most innings he's ever pitched. I mean, he's pitched and will have far more innings by the time we get to October 1st than he's ever had before. Boyd, of course, hadn't really pitched much in the last 4 or 5 years until this year. So he's going to be, pushing his inning limits. Imanaga, we got a little lucky because he had a leg injury and he missed a month. So he missed some innings that way, which is probably good. But yeah, if we're relying on Javier Assad, who hasn't thrown a pitch all season, or Jameson Teon, who got shelled today in his rehab game, if we're relying on them to be playoff starters, we sure as hell better score like 8 runs a game, because we're going to need it.
Yeah, the funny thing was, and I wrote about this at the time when Tommy Hotovy talked about this before the start of the season. They said, and we knew right at the beginning of the season that with some of these guys they'd acquired with Boyd and whatnot, who has not pitched more than, prior to this year, had not even pitched 79 innings in a season since 2019. 78.2 innings in 2021 was his high water mark. He pitched 39.2 last year. And Hotovy had said, hey, our goal, if everything breaks right, we'd like to get 120 innings from him. He's at almost 131 now, right? That becomes a little bit difficult. Where I look at this, and kind of to the point earlier about what the Brewers kind of have an ingenuity about them, right? They have to. Necessity breeds ingenuity, right? And the Cubs are like that team. Like, there was a show on Netflix a while back, this car show, like Sleeper versus Supercar. And you have these folks kind of grinding their garage and taking their little, this guy had like his Honda Odyssey van that he put 800 horsepower into, right? And they had to race like a Ferrari or a Lamborghini or whatever. And generally, like those supercars are going to win, right? Because these are $500,000 vehicles against something that somebody cobbled together in their backyard, literally. The problem with the Cubs is they're not willing to go buy the Ferrari or the Lamborghini, right? It's like Tom Ricketts will give you, the new Corvette design, those look kind of like a Ferrari from a distance. You can have the money for a Corvette. It's like, no, we don't. That's not, and it's like, well, you can buy 3 Corvettes. It's like, no, that's still not the Lamborghini. Like, that's not how this works, right? So the Cubs feel like a team again where they're outspending everyone in the division easily, right? It's not even close, but they're and that's where I think the mistakes come in. That a lot of people look at this and like, well, the Cubs are already spending more. They should be better. They shouldn't have to spend more. But the problem is that those teams, and I've said this about the Rays in the past when people have made those comparisons, those teams have always operated from that cagey underdog perspective to where their whole system from the ground up is built around having to make do with less money. So they have all these systems in place to maximize that. The Cubs don't, because they have so much more wherewithal financially, but then they're not willing to take that extra step to do what it takes. So unless they strip it all the way down and reset the whole thing, we're gonna see the same thing kind of over and over again, to where they're not getting the most, and they shouldn't have to. They shouldn't have to be efficient. That's the issue. The Brewers have to be super, super efficient with all their stuff, and things all have to break the right way, and it's worked that way. The Cubs should be able to spend through their inefficiencies, and they're not willing to do so, and therein lies the problem. Is just
that's the
saying,
difference.
Okay,
like the PTSD they have.
Efficient.
The PTSD the Cubs have over Jason Hayward is ridiculous. It's like, come on, you got John Lester, look at all the other players they signed as free agents who were quite helpful, and Hayward was not the player they'd hoped and had some down seasons, but the Yankees and the Dodgers, they've got like 3 or 4 Jason Haywards hanging on their on their roster, guys who are on the bench even though they get paid a lot of money, and they spend through it, like you said, Evan, because they can, and we can, but we don't. It's what I don't understand, and maybe you can help me, one of you, both of you. The Cubs felt like the Cubs felt like they were making that move when they went out and got Kyle Tucker, right? Yeah. Like that was the move. Now, Kyle Tucker doesn't make a lot of money, makes less than Cody Bellinger did, who they then traded get the cash back. But they gave up prospects for him, young players, guys with control. Even Paredes had control, but especially Smith. And so I just don't know if and then you look at the trade line, like how can you have 1 year of Kyle Tucker, 1 year of legitimate middle of the lineup guy, and then make all these quarter moves as opposed to like full on effort to try to win. I don't understand the philosophy there, or it's like they're not even going half in, they're going a quarter of the way in, and then they're like, oh, the water is really cold, so I'm not going to go in. Yeah. And it's like, well, okay, but somebody's just got to jump in and you'll warm up in a few minutes. But otherwise, what are we doing here?
The Cubs did win 2 out of 3 from Baltimore this weekend. But
it was a slog, though, wasn't it?
It was. And what this would be a lot angrier of a podcast if they had really thrown away a couple of these games. I mean, just even today's game, Palencia blows a save. Great that they came back and answered with a walk-off Justin Turner home run, but holy cow.
The most surprised person in the stadium might have been Turner. You see the look on his face? It's like, but hey, wait a minute, that was me.
If you lose that game and you hung on to win the 1-0 game on Friday, but my goodness, if you drop 2 of 3 or even all 3 of these to the Orioles, what a different tone that this would have been here. Instead, they successfully treaded water and stayed at 500 for the week.
Teams never look worse than when they aren't hitting, but boy, the Cubs looked like they were sleepwalking through this series, didn't they? And they got guys on base. They didn't score any of them, but they got them on base, periodically through the course of the series. But you're starting to see some of these slumps are getting kind of prolonged, like PCA's kind of having a rough go of it lately, and Bush, and of course, Suzuki and Tucker, and it's like, they were not going up against like all-star caliber arms, as you pointed out, Evan. They were all traded. Like the Orioles gave up a third of their roster. They gave up the good 1/3 of their roster. And the guys that were left, I mean, today's starter had an ERA of 6.40 or something. Come on, like you got to be able to get to these guys. Like I don't. We're at home in August. I mean, I don't understand. It's a bad time for everybody to slump, other than of course Nico Horner, who was great all weekend. But it's a bad time for these guys to all go to a slump.
It's a good thing they didn't trade Nico Horner like apparently half the fans wanted to have happen. This year, I think his consistency has really stood out among some of these other guys. But you're really seeing exactly how valuable he is, and he goes overlooked for that. But it is frustrating because I think for all of the things that they've done well and the added power. And this could just be anecdotal, and I could look back on it and be like, oh, no, you idiot, they're still doing just as much. But it really felt to me like when the Cubs were rolling, when they were really playing their best baseball, you saw a team that was hitting the ball out of the yard, that was also finding little gaps, and that was being super aggressive on the bases. That's the biggest – what stood out to me was the steals. They were off and running. It didn't matter who it was. I mean, you're talking 1 through 9 in the lineup outside of maybe like the catching position. Right, but I mean, Swanson was stealing a bunch. Tucker was going all over the place. Obviously, PCA, even Matt Shaw, John Birdie in his one game every 2 weeks that he gets to play was stealing it, and they were making things happen, and it really feels as though they backed off of that. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but
well, let's look ahead to the week that will be for the Cubs as they play 3 games at home against the Cincinnati Reds, followed by the St. Louis Cardinals in St. Louis for 3 games as well. The pitching probables for the Red Series, we mentioned Soroka pitching for the Cubs, Lodolo for the Reds, Imanaga for the Cubs on Tuesday, Zach Little for the Reds, and then on Wednesday, it's Cade Horton against Andrew Abbott. So we'll start with you, Pat, today. How are you feeling going into this week? Do we have a prediction?
Lodolo, Abbott, Gray, those are good starters. I would give the edge to the visiting team in all 3 of those games against Soroka and Horton. So we'll see. The Cubs should have the advantage in the other 3. So I would say, it's weird that the Reds are 4 or 5 games over 500, and the Cardinals are just under 500. I thought they'd be worse than that for some reason, but they're not.
The Reds are 58 and 54 at the time of this recording, bad. And just one. Yeah. And the Cardinals 56 and 57. Yeah.
Yeah, how did that happen? I thought the Cardinals were struggling, and anyway, so when I look at that, I'd like to say that this is a week when the Cubs should go 4-2 and get healthy, but I'm going to say, like I did last week, I said 3-3, and I was the lone dissenting voice in that, and I'm going to say 3-3 again. They're 8-7 since the All-Star break. They're starting their brand new fifth starter twice. Hopefully he'll throw some gems and I'll be proven wrong. I hope so. But if not, 3-3 seems pretty reasonable.
Evan?
I can't, I don't think I can dissent. And I just feel like this is one of those, the Reds are playing really good baseball right now. Andrew Abbott looks like Jesse Plemons in a baseball games, great actor, and Abbott's been acting like a really good pitcher. I mean, he was an all-star, right? Like that's tough, but there's just nothing about these upcoming games makes me feel good, and part of that's the way the Cubs have been playing. So yeah, I think 3-3. I almost want to say they'll be lucky to be 3-3 because I really
it could be worse.
I don't think like 1-5 seems a little off, but 2-4 would not surprise me in the least unless Like something has to change. The way they play now, again, you look at the Royals, the White Sox, the Orioles. Those are three teams that they should have gone in and just absolutely beat the pants off of, and they haven't. It doesn't look like this is a team that's sharp, that is playing like a team that is 18 games over 500. So yeah, I'll give them 3-3, and that's with my fingers crossed.
Yeah, Cubs have to start hitting in addition to not, getting crushed with their rotation.
Yeah, and right after this, after that 3-game series in St. Louis, they go to Toronto and play the first place Blue Jays for 3 games. That will also not be an easy series. This week, I'm of the 2-4 mindset here. I do think that they're due to drop some series here. I think they'll lose. They'll win 1 game against the Reds, and then in St. Louis is weird. It's always weird, and it's frustrating, and it's gross in August, and so I see.
It's probably gross all the time. We're just more likely to be there in August.
Yes,
more gross in August.
It's more gross. Yeah. So 2-4 for me this week, and then I'm really not feeling good about the Blue Jays series right behind it as well, but. All eyes pointing to where that 5-game series against the Brewers at the towards the end of the month here will be telling that. All eyes on that going forward. So
well, you're 2-4. I mean, you realize that if that comes true, the Cubs will be 10-11 since the All-Star break. That would be a point of concern. That's a healthy enough stretch of games against teams that aren't necessarily world beaters, although they're not all bad. That would be a real concern if your prediction comes true. That's why we should all pull for 3-3 or better.
We absolutely should. I think everything changes if you see Kyle Tucker get out of the slump and start to heat up.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen what that looks like.
Suzuki or anybody. Yeah. Somebody,
what that looks
get out of your slump.
Yeah, so we're rooting for 3-3, but. Before we get into our Ryne Sandberg tribute, I want to take a moment to let Evan remind all of our listeners how you can find his work on the internet.
Yeah, you could obviously go to just CubsInsider.com. You can search Cubs Insider on Facebook, or if you're more partial to X, at Evan Altman or at Real Cubs Insider, and we'll have everything you need.
And Evan, I don't know if you heard last week's show, but we did run down guest appearances on this show. And this appearance for you is, this was your 29th appearance here on the podcast. So that puts you in a solid second place behind Matt Trueblood in his 33 appearances, and only 1 appearance now ahead of Jared Willis. So.
Oh, hey-oh. I'll take 2. That's good. But a lot of people have said I'm number 2 in other ways, so we'll accept it.
You are number 1 in Pat's dad's heart, though.
There you go.
My dad said you're his favorite.
That's right. That's all the recognition I need right there.
You and Matt are running 1-2 in all these contests. It's very close, depending on the rating system.
It's good to know.
We always appreciate you coming on and taking time to talk Cubs with us. And now let's take some time to remember Ryne Sandberg. I will turn it over to Bruce Miles, and then we'll roll into Randy Richardson, and we'll close with Andy Dolan telling us about their memories of Ryne Sandberg. Take it away, Bruce.
Hi, my name is Bruce Miles. I was the beat writer covering the Chicago Cubs for the Daily Herald from 1998 through 2019. Before that, I covered some baseball for them from 1989 until I became the beat writer. And I got to know Ryne Sandberg over the years, not particularly well, but I think that's even better because every time I had a dealing with Ryne, whether it was an interview or meeting up with him at a Cubs event, he was always so cordial and nice. And I always felt special that way because we weren't exactly what you would call friends. We were good acquaintances, but anytime I needed an interview, anytime I needed to talk with him about a Cubs-related matter, he was always there. I think my favorite memory of Ryne was when he was the manager at AAA Iowa in 2010. Lou Piniella had just resigned as manager. The Cubs had named Mike Quade to take over for the rest of the season, with the provision that both he and Ryno and maybe some others would be a candidate for the job. So I went out to Des Moines in August of 2010, sat down with Ryno in the dugout and just talked with him about being a manager and what he wanted to do. And I was just so impressed that somebody who was a Hall of Famer was willing to work in the minor leagues. This was his fourth season as a manager in the minor leagues. He had gone up through the ranks of the Cubs system from A ball to AA to AAA. The players respected him, and the thing that they would tell me was, you would never know Ryne is a Hall of Famer because of the way he carries himself. When I got to the stadium, Principal Park in Des Moines, hot afternoon in August, Ryne was just sweating. He was hitting ground ball after ground ball after ground ball to Cubs minor leagues infielders. And I thought, well, this is a guy who really wants to do it. So we talked for a number of minutes about his goals and what he thought and why he wanted to become a manager. And I think it all stemmed from his love for the game, wanting to give back a little bit, again, something that you don't hear from a person of that stature. So those are my main memories. As a player, of course, watching with the style and the grace that he played with over all his many years with the Cubs. Played second base so flawlessly. Never really had to dive for a ball because he was always in the right position. Taught himself under the tutelage of Jim Frey early in his Cubs career to be a pull hitter, a power hitter, rather than just a singles hitter. And I think you saw it all kind of culminate in the Sandberg game in June of 1984 when he hit the 2 game-tying home runs off of Bruce Sutter, 1 of the hated Cardinals, 2 a former Cub, and 3 on the NBC Game of the Week when that really was a thing, when it really meant something. So those are the impressions that I have, and somebody who was really dedicated to the Cubs even after his career. He would do many charitable events. After a game, sometimes I'd walk up the ramp after the clubhouse interviews going to write my stories. I would see Ryne coming down the other way, and we would just stop, and he would talk about the game or a big play or two during that game. We had a chance to work together as members of the committee that elect players and other people to the Cubs Hall of Fame. I know he took it seriously because we'd have meetings going over the stat packs and everything. And, Ryne was pretty intent on doing that. And I have no idea whether we voted for the same people or not, but I do know this, that he took it seriously, just like he took every one of his other Cubs duties. So those are my main memories of Ryne Sandberg, the gracefulness, the elegance of how he was as a player, how dedicated he was to his family, how dedicated he was to the Cubs, and how this Hall of Famer took it upon himself to go through the minor leagues again and trying to become a major league manager. Unfortunately, it didn't happen with the Cubs. It happened with the Phillies, but maybe with as bad as the Cubs were in those years, maybe the Cubs did him a favor by never hiring him. Who knows how it would have turned out? We'll never know, but really a tremendous loss for not only Cubs fans, but all of Major League Baseball to have lost really an icon of this much too young.
And launched them on a course to their first postseason play in my lifetime. I grew to love that team and all the nicknames: Sarge, Penguin, Bull, and of course, Ryno. I love the daily double, the 1-2 punch of Bobby Dernier and Sandberg at the top of the lineup. That season brought back the magic of baseball that I had as a kid. Jump ahead to a frigid November afternoon in 2022 at a signing near Wrigley Field, when I had the great fortune of telling Ryno how much he'd meant to me. Just over a year later, he shared his cancer diagnosis with the world. I'm heartbroken he's gone, but I will always be grateful I had the chance to thank him in person for the memories, the magic, and what he meant to me as a fan. For me, Ryno was always first, even at second, a Hall of Famer, both on the field and off. Forever, 23.
Hi there, it's Andy Dolan from Pointless Exercise. Discipio.com both. Thank you for including me in your remembrances of Ryne. And I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about, and I have to tell the story about people are like, well, you're always going to remember where you were on a certain day. And I will always remember where I was on July 23rd, 1984, because I was at Wrigley Field for the Ryne Sandberg game, but I wasn't at the game. So to tell the story, excuse me, my brother and sister are older than I am, and they know they had aged out of going on summer vacation. So it was just me with my mom and dad. And we were headed out east. We went to, that was the one, I think we went to Gettysburg and Washington, D.C. Pretty sure that we went to Cooperstown, which isn't really close to Washington, D.C. And I know we hit Canton on the way back. It was a fun trip, but we were leaving on that Saturday. Great day to try to be driving through Chicago Saturday. But Dad he was kind of looking at what time it was. And he's like, man, maybe we can go to the Cub game. And in previous years, it would not have been a problem, right? I mean, they only drew about 17,000 people a game in '83, and but they had been drawing very well because they were the '84 team. People were starting to figure out that they were pretty good. They drew 40,000, I think, the Saturday before they hosted the Phillies, and they'd had some decent crowds. And so just the old days of being able to walk up and just get a ticket probably weren't going to happen. And we weren't going to be there early enough to just get in the bleacher line and get tickets. Plus, I don't think my mom would have wanted to have sat in the bleachers. I don't think she wanted to go at all. We found a place to park and went to McDonald's. And then I think Mom and me went to McDonald's. I was 10, 11. I suppose 11. And Dad came back and he's like, we got to make a decision real quick. Like, I can get standing room only tickets. They're going pretty fast, but I can still go back and get them. Do we want to do that? And my mom was like, no, we don't want to do that. Her idea of standing around was not what she wanted to do for 3.5. It ended up being a very long game. We didn't know that at the time. So basically, we're like, I guess we're not doing this. And we went to a bunch of games in '84. I grew up a little northwest of Rockford, and the Rockford Public Library that year, because Cubs were giving away tickets to anybody that would take them, they had like this thing where if you read X amount of books, you'd get tickets to Cub games. And we went to 7 of them for free that summer. I read a lot of books. And so we went to plenty of games. So we're like, okay, fine, let's just get going. So we hop in the car and we start heading east. The Cubs, within the second inning, they're down 7-1. So we're like, well, I dodged a bullet there. It's a good thing we didn't stick around and try to watch that crap. And then they start coming back. And we kind of realized, wow, this would have been a really good game to have been at. What I remember, so I experienced that game on the radio because we were in a car, even though it was the game of the week. Most people, they have the fond memories of Bob Costas and Tony Kubek, and one of the few times you got to see the Cubs on national TV. Well, over-the-air national TV. They were on the Superstation by then. And Harry was really mad early in the game. He was still fairly new to the Cubs, was his second year, and he hated the Cardinals still for firing him way back when. And he was mad that they were down 7-1. And it was a big booth. It was a little booth with a lot of people in it. So most of the game was Harry, Vince Lloyd, and Lou Boudreau. But Milo Hamilton was hanging around, and he did pop in from time to time. Still bitter that the Tribune had promised him Jack Brickhouse's job, and then they gave it to Harry Carey instead because Harry's good and Milo was Milo. And we kept heading east, and we're starting to lose the signal. About the time Sandberg tied it up in the 9th, it was starting to go, and it was kind of fading in and out. And then when he hit it in the 10th, we heard it, but we were starting to lose it. And it was a good thing Dave Owen came up in the 11th and won it because we had finally driven out of radio range. It was pretty amazing to experience that game that way, and then to get to complain about it for the next 41 years and going that I could have been at it and I wasn't at it. But the chance, I say, if we had standing room only tickets, we probably were going to leave. It was 7-1 in the second. Dad would have already been like, all right, we got to get on the road. and do that. And it's been fun in the years since. Like, I don't know when it was on the first time I saw the game. Yeah, we saw highlights with Bob Costas, but I don't know when I finally saw the actual game with him. Marquee shows it now like it's regular programming. It's in the rotation, but just before that, we got a chance to see it. And then I think for the 25th anniversary, BGN Radio, they still had the Cubs, they played the whole radio thing one night. I'm sure on the anniversary, on that night. And it was fun. I remember I sat and I managed to sit around, do other stuff, and listen to it. And, I think it's a superior call. You get Harry screaming and yelling, and Lou yelling, and Vince Lloyd talking about how when Bob Dernier gets on, how Vince still complaining about the extra run the Cardinals got in the top of the 10th because now Dernier couldn't just steal second and score on a base hit, but then Sandberg gets a home run. It was fun to experience that way. But the best is Harry screaming, interrupting his own home run call on the second home run to just start yelling, "He did it again! He did it again!" It was a lot of fun. I'm of an age where Ryne Sandberg was the best Cub for most of my childhood plus 12 years, and he was never my favorite player because I'm a moron. I like Sean Dunston more because I thought he was more fun. But I was always glad Ryne Sandberg was a Cub. He was a great player. I mean, we all knew it, and we would get very, very defensive of him when Joe Morgan would complain that he would never dive. We know why Joe complained, because Ryne shattered his consecutive errorless game streak. Joe complaining about Ryne coming back, because then he came back and broke Joe's record for most home runs by a second baseman. It was fun to make Joe mad. So I think it's hard to pinpoint, other than the Sandberg game, it's hard to pinpoint a Ryne Sandberg like memory, because his value was he was really good every day at everything. He was a great fielder, the best second baseman ever. You can argue the Roberto Alomar thing all you want, I don't care. It was Ryne. He was a great base runner, a great base stealer. He was a very good hitter. He eventually hit for a lot of power for a second baseman, but he just did everything really well. And the highest compliment I think he ever got was for about 10 years in a row, whenever there was a big moment. Unfortunately, there weren't as many big moments. This is because of his teammates, as there should have been. In a tense moment where the Cubs needed an out, if the ball got hit anywhere near Ryne Sandberg, Harry's call would simply be, "Don't worry." And we never did. It's very sad that we lost him this young. And I think he had a pretty great life. And, when he wanted to be a manager and it didn't work out with the Cubs, and then he did it with the Phillies, and it didn't really work with the Phillies. And then he just he was like immediately back. Like as soon as the Phillies fired him, he just was back at Wrigley. And he seemed really, really happy. Like he got to spend the last 20 years of his life going to Wrigley Field whenever he wanted and having us come up and tell him all the cool things he did as if he didn't know what they were. And he was a very, very nice man who I think he enjoyed being Ryne Sandberg more after he got done playing than he even did when he was playing, if that makes any sense. That's my Ryne Sandberg memory. Thanks, guys.
And we will close the show as we do every week with our Cubs player profile. Of course, as I mentioned, it's we'll revisit the profile that Pat did earlier this season on Ryne Sandberg.
Ryne Sandberg, born in Spokane, Washington, the greatest baseball player ever from the state of Washington. Many people don't realize that while he signed with the Phillies as a 20th round draft pick out of high school, and unlike Lou and Derek Lee before, who were first round draft picks and were high first round draft picks and premier players, he was not. However, he passed up a scholarship offer to play quarterback at Washington State University. I don't know if you know that. Signed a letter of intent with them and then backed out of it and went to the Phillies, where he sat in their farm system for a year or two and actually made his debut. It's kind of a shame that he actually played for them, because he could have gone his entire career as a Cub, but for the fact that he went 1 for 6 as the shortstop for the 1981
the 1981 Philadelphia Phillies in a brief stint. And we talked about this a lot in the 1984. We talked about Sandberg a lot in the 1984 series last year. But when Dallas Green came over to the Cubs in the early 80s, when the Tribune Company bought the team, he came from the Phillies organization. And one of the things he did was he acquired many Philadelphia Phillies. Ryne Sandberg was one of those. He came over to the Cubs in a trade along with veteran shortstop Larry Boa in exchange for cycle hitter Ivan DeJesus. Who knew that the Cubs were giving up one of only 4 cycle hitters that they would have in a 50-year period, but they did. And so Ryne Sandberg came to the Cubs. He started off in 1982 as the Cubs starting third baseman, played the whole season at third base. He was 6th in the Rookie of the Year voting. That was back when the top shortstops who debuted that year were Steve Sachs from the Dodgers, who's sort of the antithesis of Sandberg from a defensive standpoint. He's the one who had the yips and kept throwing the ball into the stands, and Johnny Ray from the Pirates. There would be this long stretch where the 3 of them would be second basemen, and at least early on, there was thought that they were all the same, but of course that wasn't true. One was great, and the other 2 were mid. So Ryne Sandberg came over to the Cubs, played third base for a year. I distinctly remember a game, I hope I'm right, against the Pittsburgh Pirates when Sandberg initiated and turned a triple play. I don't think I'd ever seen one before in my life. This was on WGN, but even on television, right? Live. And that was, he steps on third, throws to second, and then around the horn to first. And the Cubs got a triple play against the Pirates. Why I remember that, I don't know, but he was a good defensive player. He moved to second base in 1983 and then really made a name for himself in 1984 when the Cubs won the World Series almost, but didn't because they didn't make it out of the National League Championship Series. But as a young player in 1994, Ryne Sandberg won the MVP with a season with 8.5 WAR, where he had 114 runs, 200 hits, 36 doubles, 19 triples, 19 home runs, 84 runs batted in the 2-hole, 32 steals, and an 887 OPS. And for anybody who remembers the 1980s, those were huge numbers in the 1980s. Like,
Absolutely.
Add 10 to all those counting numbers or 20 to the runs and RBIs to try to put it in kind of a modern feel. So just an amazing season. He had the game at the end of June, which on Saturday afternoon, the game of the week, back when there were only 2 nationally televised baseball games every week, the Monday night game on ABC and the Saturday afternoon game. And he hit 2 home runs famously off Bruce Sutter in the 9th and 10th innings of that game. The credits were rolling the second time. It's like the game is over. The credits are rolling. And then he hits the second one and they can't believe it. It really kind of put him on the map from a fame standpoint. Not so much for Dan Roan, who had the base hit to win the game in the 11th inning, but still for Sandberg to tie the game twice was a big deal, especially off former Cub Bruce Sutter, who was a Cy Young winner himself and a future Hall of Famer. So great season for Ryne Sandberg in 84. And he continued to have great seasons for the Cubs for about a decade. He had, in his career, he made 10 All-Star teams. He not only won the MVP in 1984, he finished in the top 4 2 other times, FYI. He had 7 Silver Sluggers, 9 Gold Gloves. He set a Major League Baseball record for the most consecutive Gold Gloves as a second baseman with 9. He led the league in runs, doubles, total bases, home runs, various points in time. He was the first ever second baseman in Major League history to hit at least 30 home runs in back-to-back seasons. He had 32, I think, and 40 in back-to-back. In fact, he led the league with 40, which was unheard of for a second baseman at the time. He had 100 runs 7 times, drove in 100 runs a couple times, played on a lot of teams that were pretty good, but not great. They surrounded him with some pretty good players. After that 84-85 stretch where he had, that team, a lot of those guys were older and moved on, and the Cubs then kind of replaced them with, first you had the Andre Dawson stretch, and then you had the Mark Grace stretch, and there were decent guys around him, but it just wasn't, the Joe Girardis of the world weren't enough to put him over the top back then, I guess. So he only made the playoffs twice, 84 and in 1989 when the Cubs won the division. And you remember that, Jeremy, the boys of Zimmer, right?
Sure do. That's my youth team there.
Yeah. And I think one thing that people often forget, because why would you remember, the Cubs played in those 2 national championship series back when, you won the division and then you were playing for the World Series. There was no messing around with these multiple playoff games. He excelled in both of those playoff series. In 84, he hit 368 with a 928 OPS. And then in 89 against the Giants, again, in a losing effort, he hit 400 with a 1.258 OPS. So, when given the stage, like the bright lights and the big stage, he did well. And it's a shame that he never really got a chance to show that in kind of a World Series format or in the modern era where you could play multiple playoff series, every season. It would have been fun to watch Sandberg play a few more games, but such was life back in the 1980s. He had a couple other things he was famous for. He had 123 games in a row without an error at second base, major league record. He retired with a 989 fielding percentage, all-time record, second base, upon his retirement, and really, was known not just for his defense, but also for his offense. He's one of 4 players to ever hit 40 home runs in a season and steal 50 bases in a season, along with this Barry Bonds guy, Brady Anderson. What do they have in common? And then Ronald Acuna, who more recently did it. And we had to stop the game and have a big celebration for him.
Your list is just a smidgen out of date.
Oh, who did I miss from last year? Oh, has Kyle Tucker done it yet this year? No.
Shohei Ohtani.
Oh, Ohtani, of course. I don't count pitchers.
But
anyway,
I was going to jump in with that fun fact if you didn't bring it up. So that's otherwise that's the list, and it's still an incredible list.
He is famous for also being a hero to Joe Morgan, also a Hall of Famer, who was such a huge fan of Ryne Sandberg. He has a statue of him in his house, I'm sure. He said nothing but positive things about Sandberg during his entire broadcasting career. He just really admired Sandberg for being so great. Thanks, Joe. More recently, Sandberg unfortunately has become famous for prostate awareness issues with cancer, because he developed that cancer and looked like he had beaten it. It looks like it's back and it spread. So in the middle of his career, not in the middle, but towards the end of his career, I should say, there was a period when Sandberg actually retired from baseball in 1994 after about 2 months, and he sat out the entire 95 season and then came back for a couple of years and actually performed fairly well when he came back. He had like 25 homers and 92 RBIs after a year and a half off, whatever. And he says that it was he had lost his love for the game. I wish he had not, because he probably would have hit 300 homers and probably would have had a couple other those counting stat numbers had he not missed those 10 months. And as a result, when he was up for Hall of Fame voting, he did make it in the Hall of Fame, but it took 3 years on the ballot before he did. Ridiculous.
God, I hate the Hall of Fame voting.
Yeah.
The whole thing just pisses me off every time I hear about it. It never makes me feel good. It always makes me mad whenever I hear about this stuff.
He went into the Hall of Fame with champion of humanity, Wade Boggs. And so Sandberg also famous for once being the highest paid player in baseball. He made almost $6 million. He was almost a $6 million man. Not quite. He was like a $5.75 million man, I think. But and what was interesting is that he gave up that when he quit in 1994. He was the highest paid player. Imagine being the highest paid player at baseball today and quitting and taking off a year and 4 months and then coming back for less money later on. It seems almost it would not happen, right? It couldn't happen, I don't think. Anyway, he was also a manager, for the Cubs Peoria Chiefs team. Was it A-ball manager? And then there was a lot of talk about how, from Cubs fans, about wanting him to be the manager of the Cubs. And remember, even on this podcast, right? Please no, because honestly, you don't want your heroes and the guys from your youth, the stars of your team who are going to have statues, which he does, outside the ballpark. You don't want them to be your manager. We saw with David Ross, who escaped from that fairly unscathed, really, and all things being considered. But you don't want your absolute heroes to do that, right? Because it can only go one direction, right?
No, we were supportive of him being a manager somewhere
with the Phillies,
else.
right?
Yes, with the Phillies, absolutely.
Because
Because
he got to start. And he went to the Phillies, and the funny part, when he was a manager, both in Peoria but also with Philadelphia, as a player, he was very low key, like on the field. he was not a guy who got in a lot of arguments or fights. He was very, he was very in check emotionally. As a manager, though, he'd get kicked out all the time. It was hilarious watching him, kick dirt on umpires. I'm like, he never did that as a player, but as a manager, he felt like he owed it to his players to do that. So that was kind of a funny aspect of that. And from what I'm told, in real life, Rick Sutcliffe would back this up. I think he was actually, although a quiet guy overall, he was a prankster himself. Like, he liked to have fun, and he was not, he was a good teammate and a good guy, and would play around too. So he wasn't like just some stoic figure who sat in the locker room like a statue. He was a good teammate and a good player, and obviously one of the great Cubs of all time, one of the great second basemen of all time, and certainly a standard by which I think other second basemen have sometimes been judged, probably unfairly, by the Cubs, especially for their defense, because he was so good for so long a period of time. So that is the Ryne Sandberg story.
And with that, we're going to wrap it up and call it a podcast. Make sure you're following us on all the social media platforms at Wrigleyville Net. Make sure you are subscribed over at the YouTube, youtube.com. Search for Wrigleyville Nation Podcast. And thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for keeping us ad-free over at patreon.com/Wrigleyville Nation. And with that, we're going to call it a podcast. Pat, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks again, everyone, for listening. And we'll talk to you again next time.